We were just talking Yanks. Let's talk Mets. Kevin Burkhardt joins us out at Port St. Lucie right now. And Kevin, I guess it's just another day down there compared to what's going on in Tampa, isn't it?
I didn't even know the Mets were here, honestly. There was, it's funny, we were talking to some of the writers today, and they were saying they could write anything they wanted because no one would ever see their story tomorrow, and I think they would agree that's true. And you know what? The Mets are okay with that. Nice and quiet here today for the most part. Carlos Delgado showed up, and he was kind of the focal point, but just another kind of lazy day out here at Port St. Lucie. You know, most of the players that aren't here today, there's still some that aren't here. Moise Alou will show up tomorrow, and, I don't think you'll be, the Mets are making much news come tomorrow's newspaper, that's for sure.
You know, you mentioned Delgado, though, and certainly Met fans, they look at him and they say, last year was not a good year. They have to have him anchoring that middle of the lineup, the middle of the order this year to be able to drive in the guys like Reyes and Wright who get on base and Beltran who get on base in front of him, and they didn't get it last year.
Yeah, they don't need him, Chris, to be what he was, in the 90s in Toronto, per se, but they can't have him be what he was last year either. And last year, he struck out way too many times. Even though when you look at his numbers, I think he struck out 118 times. He had worse years, but there were so many situations where he struck out on bad balls, swung at bad balls, and left way too many guys on base. So they need him to be better than last year for sure. He doesn't have to be unbelievable, but they need him to be better than last year. And he talked at length about that. And to Delgado's credit today, he was in a chipper mood. He was in a good mood. He looked good. He looked, like he had lost some weight, maybe looked in pretty good shape. And he said, look, I'm not making any excuses. He said everything was fine last year. Hands were fine, wrist was fine, elbow was fine. That was not the reason. He said, bottom line is my timing was off. He said, I looked at tapes, I checked things out, and he doesn't feel that his hands are slow. He still feels that, his hands can get around on the baseball. He doesn't feel like he's losing a step because he's in his mid-30s now. He thought it was timing all the way, and the way he described it is, bottom line is, when the pitcher's about to throw the ball, I got to be ready to hit. And he felt that a lot of times last year, for one reason or another, he was off. And I think the theme that he talked about, Willie Randolph even touched on it too, is he put a little bit too much pressure on himself. This is a guy, Chris, that's been so consistent for his entire career, and all of a sudden you're struggling and struggling. I think just you assume you're going to come out of it, and he didn't. So I think as it mounted, he pressed and pressed and pressed, and maybe just thought a little bit too much about it. He even said that, I went back to basics a little bit in Puerto Rico. I started from scratch. I started hitting off the tee and just almost forgetting everything I knew and learning everything again how to hit this year, which I thought was kind of interesting.
Kevin, it's for Reyes. The last month and a half of the season, it was just a nightmare for the kid. What are they doing about his psyche? And, is it Willie dealing with him, or is it other veterans dealing with him? Is he just acting like it never happened? How is he coming into the spring? Because the end of his season was just abysmal. I mean, and it really cost his team.
You're right, Pharrell. And when you look at Reyes, what he did was down the stretch was, hit 200 basically, and he is such a catalyst for the offense that everyone kind of looked at him as one of the big reasons. And to his credit, he took a lot of the blame when he came into camp the other day. He said, "Look, I feel largely responsible for this because I was awful down the stretch, and I'm a big reason why we score runs." So I give him a lot of credit there. But he really looks unfazed. He's the same self. He's running around. He's happy. He's out there bouncing around, in the cage and things like that. And I think the one difference that I think for Reyes is he will learn from it. He's such a young guy, and I think Willie, who admitted it the other day, said, "Look, I'm going to give him some days off." I think he was tired at the end of the year. This guy plays every day, and I don't care how old you are. When you're playing 161 games, you get tired at the end of the year, especially a guy that stole as many bases as he did. And I think that's the other thing, too. Maybe they cut down on the times he steals. Willie also said, maybe I have to give him a stop sign every now and again because I think that takes a toll on your body. So I think giving him some more off days, maybe reducing the amount of times he steals, even though he's got obviously great speed, just kind of keeping his body in better shape down the stretch. But I really am not too worried about him. I think he'll bounce back just fine.
Kev, it's Raj Rubin. I wanted to get your take on this Delgado thing a little bit because, you and I were in the clubhouse a whole bunch of times last year, and I just don't think, I mean, I know what he was saying, but I don't feel like he was all torn up about the way that he was performing last year when it was going on. Now, I know that he wants to play better this year. I'm wondering if you think that the idea that this is his walk year, that maybe he is playing for another contract, could be a component in maybe a resurgence of Delgado for this season.
Well, it's a good point, Roger, and it's one that was brought up today, and he talked about it, and he said it isn't a factor, but, of course it's a factor. And, I think you look at it in two ways, though. I'm not even talking about the fact that it's his walk year. I'm talking about the fact does the guy want to play baseball anymore? Because if he goes out and has another bad year and it looks like he's slow catching up to the fastball, who knows where he goes? Maybe no one wants to sign him. Maybe people think, well, Carlos Delgado is on the downside here, and he doesn't have much left to offer. But I think the other side too is if you go on, a lot of guys. There are plenty of guys who perform very well in that walk year. But look at Andrew Jones last year. Jones, I think, probably put too much pressure on himself, and he was flat out horrendous. So I think if you're Delgado, you just got to forget about that. I think you just got to go out and get back to basics. He said he's doing that. I think the biggest thing I want to see, Roger, you were at plenty of those games in the clubhouse, as you said. I think he's got to lay off the terrible pitches. I mean, how many times last year, 2 strikes, and here's a fastball at his head, and he swings at it. He's got to lay off the high inside pitches. I think, to me, that's number one. If he does that, I think the results will be a lot better.